Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very, very senior professional from New York City, USA, Marisa Zalabak. Marisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Thank you. Marisa is the founder of Open Channel Culture. She's an educational psychologist and she's an adaptive leadership coach. So, Marisa, let's start by talking about open channel culture. Tell me about this.
Well, it was an interesting thing. When I first started Open Channel, it was to take the things that I had learned both in several of the sectors that I had worked in, and I had seen that it was the same needs that were happening in the corporate world. It was the same needs that in education, same needs in non-for-profits. And it came down to, what gets written off so often as humans, soft skills, right? But they're human skills. And so I began to really focus on creating programs, creating coaching models for developing those skills, right? For people, because those are, I always say no one gets a certificate of completion in emotional intelligence or social intelligence. We're always growing.
Correct.
And then I also had done research and work with several organizations and institutions on creative and imaginative thinking and intelligence. And so I began to incorporate that. So I do what I was beginning with was emotional, social, and creative intelligences. And then it began to expand from there. I also, because culture work was something I had done quite a bit of, organizational culture.
Okay.
And that was also as a foundation for all of it. But in order to have a culture that was going to be healthy, that was going to be productive, that having emotional, social, and creative intelligence would be useful. And also differentiating between what a culture is and what climate is, because people very often interchange those. But the climate is just, if we think of it just like weather, right? If I go into the Sahara, we know what the climate is. Culture of the people living in that climate may be different in one part of the Sahara to another part of the Sahara. So we really want to differentiate and be very specific about the needs of a specific culture within an organization.
Fascinating. You also speak about adaptive leadership. Help me understand how you define adaptive leader or leadership.
Well, it's funny. It's something that I had not referred to as adaptive leadership for many years. It was what I call best practices. And then someone said to me, oh, it sounds like, and I had been using the term at some point. I started using the term. And somebody said, oh, you mean Heifetz's adaptive leadership? And I went, you mean the musician Heifetz? And then I had no idea. I had not read Heifetz and Linsky's adaptive leadership, which I'm thinking you're familiar with from Harvard.
Yeah.
And then when I read it, it was exactly what I had been doing. The thing is, I had two more pillars. They have four pillars, and I completely, they're aligned with what I've been doing, which is emotional intelligence is the first one.
Yeah.
And they include the social intelligence in that.
Yeah.
Organizational justice.
Yeah.
Right, which a huge part of my work has been social justice work over the years. The third element that they talk about is, it's basically personal development. They call it development, but it's how you modeling, not just saying to people, have a growth mindset, because we hear that all the time. Our business has a growth mindset, but am I seeing the leader? Am I seeing the head of the organization? Am I seeing you modeling learning and unlearning? And the fourth is applied character. And what I mean by applied character is when we talk about character strengths, but we don't need the same character strengths for every single situation.
Mm-hmm.
I may need courage for this situation. I may need patience for that situation.
Mm-hmm.
I need vulnerability for this situation. I may need discernment for that.
Right.
Being specific about character strengths that are applied.
Mm-hmm.
And those were the 4 that they use.
Mm-hmm.
And then I added 2 that I think are necessary. One is AI ethics, which
Mm-hmm.
interestingly, I'll tell you about, I became quite involved in the ethics of artificial intelligence.
Right.
And regenerative design,
Mm-hmm.
which has to do with sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, those are absolutely essential in today's world.
Okay.
So those are the 6. When I'm referring to adaptive leadership, I'm talking about coaching and training in those areas, in those realms.
Fascinating. So before I get into coaching, since you spoke about the ethics of artificial intelligence, talk to me a little bit, because our young viewers and listeners would love to understand your view on the ethics of AI.
Well, it's an interesting thing. So I'm co-chair of the AI Ethics Education Committee with IEEE, which is a huge engineering organization.
Yeah.
And I'm not a technician. I'm a psychologist.
Okay.
I was enlisted. I've done several papers and committees with IEEE, but I have been invited in as a psychologist. And when we talk about AI ethics, most people assume that engineers have been trained.
Correct.
Ethical use when they're designing, right? Sadly, that's actually not the case. Most engineers have had very minimal. That's changing. It is beginning to change, which is
Correct.
lovely. But most engineers have had very minimal training in what is referred to as AI ethics. So when we're talking about designing, developing, mobilizing, producing AI, the bottom line, there's many questions to ask when you're doing an evaluation, but the bottom line is, do you want to actually live in a world where that exists? Do you want the people you love to live in a world where that exists? And we very often, in the design and production of things and mobilization, get lost in, we can do this, but should we do it? And humans have, on average, 187 cognitive biases.
Okay.
And then there's, on top of that, those are charged with emotional chargers, right? So there's endless variations of biases, and everyone has them, right? Most of them are involuntary. But if we can begin to look at those, it's about awareness. It's really about self-reflection. It's about compassion for ourselves, for the world, for each other. Ethics is, to me, the AI ethics is really, it's interesting that I should be in it. Wouldn't have thought I would have been, but I love the questions.
Very interesting. Yeah. Absolutely fascinating. The whole topic of artificial intelligence is so new to such a large part of the world, but I agree, ethics is a very important factor. But moving on, Marisa.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's also just the fact that what's interesting to me, I didn't realize, is that there's not even an agreed upon definition of artificial intelligence.
Correct. It could have any boundaries.
Yes.
I agree. Yeah. But now moving on to coach, and I'd love to talk to you at some other stage on AI, because there are a whole lot of privacy issues, etc. But I'll leave that for another conversation. I'd like to now come to your other role as a coach. And let me start by asking you a question, which is, when I was growing up and a young manager, I'm talking of the early 80s, coaching, mentoring was either done by a family elder or someone senior in your organization who took a liking to you. What has changed in the last few decades that people are now seeking professional intervention and are willing to pay for it?
I think it's a great question, and I think there are several elements to it and factors. I think that society has changed and become more isolated. And so what you're describing, the earlier model, was a social, almost an apprenticeship model.
Well said.
Right.
Yep.
Right. That's very much, and it's also we're about the same age. I think that was, that was very much the model I had growing up.
Correct.
Right? That there was an apprenticeship that you were doing. Now, professions are changing. Geographic locations are changing. People are more isolated socially. They don't belong to communities where they're with people daily, right? Sometimes they're only digitally with people. And so people, I think, are seeking out connection, seeking out opportunities for reflection that one would have if you were really immersed in the community, right? You would be watching it, you would be modeling it, you would be seeing it. You would not necessarily be talking about it, but you might be witnessing it. And I think that there's psychologically a real desire to have that connection, right? And to have that, and to see and immerse oneself. I also think that it's also an industry boom. People decided, oh, coaching is the new profession.
Correct.
Right? So it became kind of, it can become flavor of the month.
Correct.
And, I think if it works for someone, if that's the coach, that's fantastic. But I think it's also I think it's really wanting the coaching industry, I think, could really use some more, I don't know, some specific guidance. Some real guidance.
Yeah. I agree with you. I agree. My next question to you, Marisa, is that given the incredible background you have and your formal training as a psychologist, what would you say are some of your learnings from your background that you bring to your coaching, your style, your values?
Well, there's many values I bring to my coaching. Compassion probably is the first one. Generosity, love, discernment, curiosity. To me, curiosity in really, it was interesting because I became an educational psychologist because I was more interested in learning why people learn than what they learn, because the what is interesting, but the what's going to keep changing. The why someone wants to learn, right? That involves so much more. That involves mind and heart and culture and upbringing, and there are so many aspects to that. So for me, that's really quite fascinating. The other thing I bring to coaching is that I have an extraordinarily unusual range of professions that I worked in. People keep calling it the unpredictable mix of me. And I think I bring such a panorama, right? Or a kaleidoscope. Kaleidoscope is probably better analogy, of lenses to really look at the world through. That I'm also, that as a coach, what I feel that I'm able to, or what people tell me that I'm able to do, is I'm able to see lenses in them that are very often ignored, that are very often not seen. And I think sometimes we become too simplistic in life. We think it's one thing or another thing, and we become, we want to identify things very simplistically. And I think that that's okay. But I think we're also, as human beings, we're very complex, beautifully complex.
Correct.
Right? And so I really I think my desire to do many things is also helpful in helping others find the full array of their possibilities.
Very interesting. And My next question, and then, a few minutes ago, you had spoken about climate and culture. Uh, the US is probably one of the most multicultural countries that exists in the world.
Mhm.
I'd like to get your perspective on how does culture impact coaching?
Oh, culture impacts coaching on in every level, both actually in an organizational context where it's the culture of the organization,
Mm.
but the culture of where one grew up,
Mm-hmm.
the intersectionality of one may have been born one place and is bringing those things into a new culture, and how has that changed them. And so finding out the background of someone, finding out their drivers,
Mm.
because their values are placed in their cultures. People's values are in their cultures, people's belief systems are in their cultures, people's actions,
Mm.
how we behave with others, right? Our behavior, our communication styles.
Mm.
So for me, it's always an exploration in the beginning. And that's where curiosity serves me best,
Mm-hmm.
to find out not how they are like me,
Mm.
but how they are themselves,
Correct.
and what they believe are the aspects
Mm.
that they bring in
Mm.
that have informed how they see the world,
Mm.
right? What they want to accomplish in the world.
Mm.
Because same cultural, right? If we come from the same culture, we might have a view on achievements from people from that culture. We
Mm.
might have an opinion about failures from people of that
Mm.
culture. So we begin, and we can project that on others if we're not really conscious about it.
Mm.
So especially working in a melting pot, and because so much of my work is what is referred to as transdisciplinary collaboration,
Mm.
it's really important to honor and invite all the cultures. It's a little
Mm.
messy,
Correct.
but it's so much more. There's so much more that can be produced out of it. There's so much
Mm.
more innovation that
Mm.
comes out of that. So I
Mm.
think culture to me is very exciting. And I've been in New York now for decades, and I work with people from all over the world
Mm.
speaking, dozens of languages.
Correct.
And I always find that very inspiring, very
Mm.
exciting.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, we've got time for one more question for coaching, and then I'll move on to some other questions. Uh, Today's young leaders in the corporate world are millennials, Gen Zs, and they're getting into positions of influence. What, in your view, are the areas these young leaders need to be coached in?
Well, I think, first of all, I don't think it's different in many ways. It's not very
Mhm.
different from uh, anyone else.
Mhm.
But really emotional awareness first.
Mhm.
Do I even know why and how and what I do?
Mhm.
How am I feeling? How am I thinking? Am I aware of myself? Can I manage
Mhm.
myself
Mhm.
before? And now, can I do that with others? I
Mhm.
think the second one is really about listening. And it's really deep levels of listening. I
Mhm.
took a course with MIT, which is, and I've been doing listening circles for many, many years.
Mhm.
And there was an entire section of the course, several months, that was just on listening.
Mhm.
And I thought, oh, I've got this.
Okay.
And what was wonderful was, for even me,
Mhm.
finding levels, deeper and deeper levels of listening, of being listened to,
Mhm.
of generative listening,
Mhm.
of regenerative listening, of creative listening. And so listening it's very often reduced, right, to something that's just one thing.
Right.
But I think that that's a skill that
Mhm.
will open up their entire lives.
Mhm.
And what else? I think that also that especially for younger people,
Hmm.
they have a voice and they have agency.
Mm-hmm.
And they, and I don't want to say they,
Hmm.
I think I want to say, to anyone, any young person
Yeah.
listening, you have voice, you have agency, please use it.
Hmm.
It's your world, it's your future. And I want the future to be so beautiful for you. But we do need young leaders to
Absolutely.
begin claiming, right? To begin claiming their voices, putting their voices out there and taking action. So I love working with young leaders and younger people. I was just out at a conference in Stanford, and I just loved being with the younger people at the conference, who to me had such exciting vision.
Correct.
It was beautiful. But to honor the vision,
Absolutely.
honor those visions, honor those voices.
Absolutely. And I also love the energy and the new perspectives they bring to any conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. And so use that agency, use that voice. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah, wonderful. Marisa, my last question to you, and this is for the thousands of people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your vast experience, and not just vast, but such different types of experience, including working as a psychologist with IEEE, which is an organization of engineers, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away from our conversation?
I always think of lessons as invitations.
Yeah.
I think the invitation is first, my invitation is to become more self-aware. So that you can be aware of others, right? And and open your curiosity, right? Because I think that allows us to have self-compassion and compassion for others. I think the second invitation is really learning the how versus learning to ask the how versus the what.
Yeah.
Right. Because we're so looking for solutions right away that we're not necessarily looking at the question. So how, why, right? Look at the questions. And I think the third is thinking about not just what you want to gain, but I invite people to invite, what do you want to leave behind you?
Wonderful.
Right? What is the legacy that you want to leave in the world? And that could be the legacy you want to leave for tomorrow, the legacy you want to leave for your family, the legacy you want to leave to everyone, right? To begin to not think about just the gain, but what do I want the consequence to be?
Oh, wonderful. Marisa, on that note, and your 3 wonderful invitations, and I'm going to use this word invitation in front of lessons, and I'll give you credit for it, of being self-aware, learn to ask how, and always see what do you want to leave behind and what is your legacy. Thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me about Open Channel, about adaptive leadership, about your amazing thoughts on coaching. Thank you again, and good luck.
Thank you so much for having me, Ash.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.